We really need to take our own lives in our own hands and not put so much power in these people that are busy with other things too. We need to take responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah, that permission. We're waiting on permission. We're waiting for a leader who, guys, I've coached hundreds and hundreds of leaders, and I've watched thousands of leaders over my time. And what I can tell you is they're just as imperfect and fallible as you are. So you're asking someone who has their own career, their own mouths to feed at home, their own desires, their own exhaustion level, their own stress level, their own job, to somehow cater to the very, very unique needs of an individual and X number of individuals that they might lead, right? Be the leader of. So I'm not saying that organizations shouldn't support people's career growth. I hope they do. But I also want employees to have enough ownership that they're like, at least from a 60-40.
Anna Oakes is my guest today. Anna is a consultant, coach, and caretaker of humanity. She combines her love for humanity with her 20 plus years of corporate experience and over 4 years as an entrepreneur, as a leader, coach, and strategic business advisor. Anna and her team are currently focusing their work on intrapreneurs, those change makers, innovators who choose to work within organizations. And she's currently writing a book to help entrepreneurs maximize their impact in their role and organization, while helping organizations lead and leverage this valuable resource. Anna gave her first TEDx talk in April of 2019, and the focus of her talk was to help you leverage your current role to get to your best next. There's many different ways to reach Anna, including her social media, their team website, and her weekly podcast, Building High Performance Teams. And I put a link to all of her resources in the show notes. Let's get to the interview. Anna, welcome to the Onward podcast.
Oh, thank you, Emily. I'm honored to be here.
I love your name, mainly because my daughter's name is Anna.
Oh, is she more graceful than I am? That's what our name means.
I don't know you very well yet, so I'll let you know at the end of the interview if she's more graceful.
Yeah, I think I'm more emotionally graceful, but physically it's sort of like my parents have always got a laugh out of that. Like I'm the one who falls over for no reason kind of thing. That's great.
Boy. So is that an adversity that you've had to overcome in your life?
No. Comparatively speaking to the other adversities, no, that's like at the very bottom of the list.
Well, we can just get right into it. What are some tough things that you've been through in your life? What has shaped you, and what advice do you have? This podcast is all about, facing adversity, moving onward. Sometimes it's hard when you're right in the middle of it, but
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about that in preparation for this conversation. It's so targeted,
glad you prepared for the conversation.
Yeah. Like what adversity. And, I'm thinking about, honestly, Emily, I was like, oh my gosh, the state of the world that we're living in right now it feels like if I say anything, it feels so minuscule to the mass breakout of this COVID-19 and the social injustice. And then now the election, it just feels like 2020 is a year of adversity for America. And as hard as that is to see, I mean, in my day-to-day, Emily, I do coaching and consulting with organizations. So I like to say, I'm almost like a doctor who knows every part of you, right? Because I come into an organization and I see and I learn and observe, and you sort of see the humanity and sometimes the beauty, but often the ugliness of who we are and what we are. But I look at this collective adversity that we've been through this year, and I'm really hoping that we can make good out of it. Because that was my sort of reflection, Emily, is that despite the adversity, which many of them felt very big for me at the time, I really love my life and who I am today. And so I sort of look at, like, as sucky as some of that stuff was, it made me who I am. And so I think it started at a really good life. I'll just give you high level, happy to dig into any of them particularly specifically. But, I look back at those big rocks, and I've been through enough therapy where I can give you my top 10 list, but I'll pick out a few really, I think, ones that shifted who I am. And one of the first was having an abusive boyfriend in high school for a number of years. I'm actually somebody who I had befriended who was involved in gangs. And although I grew up in a very homely, like homey and loving home, not homely, but homey and loving.
Yeah.
I don't know. I sort of had this savior complex that I could save him, but inevitably I was in an abusive relationship, both physically and emotionally. And that's a very impressionable time in your life. And so I spent a good part of those formative years with heartbreak, heartbreak and shame and a lot of those things that come with that. My themes sort of continue with boys or men. I was engaged to a man who ended up cheating on me with a friend and calling our wedding off a few months before the wedding. And now looking back, it's been so many years that feels sort of like, but no, that is really a big deal when you agree to promise your life to somebody and they sort of, one day it changes on a dime, and I really did care for him. So, there's the high school relationship, there's the engagement. I had a failed first marriage that was also not very helpful or healthy, a lot of stress around that. But those are more relationship based. I'm so grateful. Unlike many friends and family members or people that I know who maybe didn't have the stability or the love of parents, I was sort of able to counteract that with some good family care. And then I had 7 surgeries. So 7 physical surgeries, which I think that physical and emotional side, we have to acknowledge that both of those are things that we carry with us every day, but they can make us stronger.
So why do you think, I too have been involved in relationships that weren't healthy. Why do we stay in those relationships?
Oh man. Well, I think there's a couple questions. One is like, why do we get into them? Second is why we stay. And honestly, I think why we stay makes more sense to me. I think we stay because many of us, whether through nature or nurture, grew up with sort of these norms of, regardless that over 50% of marriages end in divorce. I sort of grew up with this mentality. I don't even know if it was given to me directly, but I did grow up in a church sort of home, whereas like you don't get divorced, and you get divorced for really bad things, but like it's got to get really, really bad, And so it was sort of this,
you don't want to be a quitter,
right? Like don't quit. And you made this commitment. In fact, when I ended up leaving my marriage, this is my second abusive relationship. And when I ended up leaving my marriage, I got a letter from a family member sort of condemning me despite all of the scary, frightening things that were going on. So I just it's a reminder, I think, Emily, that like people just don't understand. And even when they try to sympathize or empathize, we just have to be really firm in our decision that we're going to go. For me, it's always been about acknowledging what happened and trying my best to not shame myself into like fully owning everything that happened. I had certainly a part of it energetically, but acknowledging that it happened, but then also having hope that there's this bigger, brighter thing ahead of you, right? That you can actually get better and do better. It's a theme of my life's work. So of course I try to live it out personally too.
Yeah. I just remember when I was in that one relationship with my kid's dad, I really believe I tried everything. We went to counseling. I did, I tried, but it was always like, in the end, it was always like my fault if I hadn't done this, so.
Yeah. But you know what, Emily, I sort of look at those situations. Are you familiar with Elizabeth Lesser? She's sort of thought leader. Actually, wasn't familiar with her up until recently. I heard her on Brene Brown's podcast, which I love. She's totally my mind crush. But I just started this book called Broken Open by Elizabeth Lesser. Okay. And I'm only about 2 chapters in, but I've highlighted like every word in the book. And what I can just share with you briefly is that she had a longtime marriage too that I'm just learning dissolved. So I can't tell you all the details, nor do they matter. Right. It was a marriage that she thought would work like you and I did. And then it didn't. And whatever you believe, she ended up meeting with, I think it was a tarot card reader or a psychic. And somebody said, you've had repeated cycles. This is like a soul cycle thing. You keep repeating your pattern. So to go back to your earlier question, Emily, like, why do we do this? I definitely have repeated patterns in my life. And I see that happen for people that I coach, for organizations that I consult with. We form these habits as humans because we're fallible and imperfect. And it's really, really hard for us to get out of them collectively, even in a system, right? Like a church, a school, a place of work. But it's also very challenging for us to get out of them individually. I think it's easier for us to change things in some respects individually when it's under our control. And sometimes it's easier to have the support of a system saying like something needs to change.
Yeah, right? Yeah. No, I get it. And I think part of it is just being aware. Sometimes we're not aware of those paths that we keep repeating. And
Yeah.
sometimes you can only see them when you look backwards. You can't see it when you're in it.
Right.
And that's the importance of having a coach, right? To help you see your blind spots.
Yeah. I tell everybody, look, I've been in therapy since I was 14, not constantly, but a lot. And I'm a big believer in it. So I believe the world would be better if we would all have a coach and a therapist, because they are different, right? I always tell people, they'll leave our session and they'll say like, oh, it felt like therapy. And I'm a business and leadership coach. So I have to be very, very careful of like, well, that's really great that you felt like that was therapy and you got something out of that. But at the same time, I'm only scratching the surface with the lane that has been drawn for me, which is your business and your leadership for me personally. Different coaching for you, I'm sure. But I have to stay in that lane. And I want them to understand that they could actually have some even more personal benefits if they went to see a therapist, right? They could have this like really good balance almost between like a board of directors of sorts of people who can support you for different needs.
Yep. I interviewed a woman and she talked about, and it was an episode that I published a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago, Angie Schwartz. And it was entitled, have your own personal board of directors.
Yeah, it's something I recommend to people in the professional space all the time. But here's the thing, our professional and our personal space should bleed together much more than it has historically, and is bleeding together much more than it has historically now. And it's happening in a really, like I would say, scrappy, quick way, which means that we all are going to need to figure out this unique blend of work and life, which I've always been hoping for people, Emily, but now it's come so quick that like we did it really scrappy. And so now we have to figure out like, all right, what are the processes and emotional response that we need to have in order for it to be sustainable?
Yeah.
Right. The work-life blend is not bad. It just happened so abruptly that we're going to have a big adjustment time. But when we can get it, and this is what, I give talks on the corporate side all the time for startups, big companies. And I'm always saying, like, if you can master and get better at one side, like you think work sucks, you think home sucks, pick one, right? Maybe, or, one or both suck. Pick the one and watch how the other one starts to improve too. With a little bit of effort, they both sort of rise up together.
Yeah. 7 surgeries you've had?
I did. Yeah. Started when I was 15 and my appendix ruptured. So that caused quite a bit of discomfort and pain, and then lasting effects with some scar tissue buildup, endometriosis, adhesions, cysts, had my uterus operated on. And then my twins were born in my 6th surgery. It was my C-section where my twins were born, which is like the best thing ever. They're 10 and they just turned 10, Asher and Juniper. And then my 7th surgery was just in December of last year, 2019. And that was I did a partial hysterectomy. All my issues have sort of been in that abdomen area, which is also very interesting from a female perspective. We tend to harbor our emotions and our adversity in our abdomen and sort of physically carry it there. And it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. So for me, it's been a relief, but also a very big adjustment since December. Not only did I have that, but then, quarantine hit. So
yeah, now you got 10-year-olds. That's an awesome age though.
They're so fun. Like I always tell my husband it was a lot easier when they were younger, but now that they're older, we have these really meaningful conversations about life, because when they're like up until 8, they have this veil of childlike innocence. And then at 9, that veil psychologically and brain development wise, they're able to sort of take that veil off and see the world as it really is, which is not as nice as they thought it was. But with reality comes a lot of beauty too, where they can start to really put pieces together. So it's cool to hear them look at situations of people's adversity or the country's adversity or their own and really start to equate that to it's not the end of the world. Right. And that's, that perspective is really important for all of us, children and adults.
Yeah, no kidding. So you talk about intrapreneurs?
I do. Yeah. Okay. So
we all know the term entrepreneur, but what's an intrapreneur?
Yeah. So I didn't invent the term intrapreneur, but I use it a lot. I gave a TED talk on it, a TEDx talk last year. And really, this is how I would explain it. And it goes back to my roots in adversity and perseverance a lot, because what I've seen in my 25 years of professional working is that there is far too much ignoring of humanity in the workplace and far too much coasting in our life and in our work. And so I can't fix everybody, nor do I even want to try, but I do want to give people the tools. And so my personal experience and skills had led me to the lane of in the workplace, how do I help people be more of themselves? There's some studies that have been done, Emily, on self-awareness, for example, right? Self-awareness is the number one predictor of success for CEOs.
Yeah.
Right? Cornell University did that study. So it's not charisma, it's not strategic thinking. It's literally knowing what you're good at and maybe what you're not so good at, and not staying in your lane, but actually trying to work more in the lane that makes you look really good and makes you impact others really, really well. And so I want to help people sort of overcome their own like chips on their shoulder. And we all have one because we've all been through junk. But if we can sort of get rid of that, take more ownership of, I choose to work here, I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to use this as a learning ground, a training ground for whatever my best next is. I just really, you look at some of the statistics that only a third of our workforce is really engaged in what they're doing. That means they like it and they're performing well. 2/3 of our workforce doesn't really like what they're doing and isn't performing well. Like that feels like a crisis to me, right? Where it's like, nobody's dying over this every day, but our livelihood actually is connected to our emotional and physical health. So the concept of intrapreneurs, let me answer that and then I'll stop talking. That's where it bridges the gap for me, Emily, in the sense that like I wanted people who work inside organizations to understand they have just as much power and creativity and skill set to be entrepreneurial, but do it within an organization. You can be an intrapreneur and still explore and be happy and align with your strengths and be adventurous.
I saw a little bit of your TED Talk. I didn't get to watch the whole thing, but I saw pieces of it. And you were talking about that, like a lot of times employees just rely, but they rely on the boss or their supervisor to make them happy or to give them the next promotion or to give them the next opportunity. And we really need to take our own lives and our own career in our own hands and not put so much power in these people that are busy with other things too. Right. We need to take responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah, that permission. We're waiting on permission. We're waiting for a leader who, guys, I've coached hundreds and hundreds of leaders, and I've watched thousands of leaders over my time. And what I can tell you is they're just as imperfect and fallible as you are. So you're asking someone who has their own career, their own mouths to feed at home, their own desires, their own exhaustion level, their own stress level, their own job, to somehow cater to the very, very unique needs of an individual and X number of individuals that they might lead, right? Be the leader of. So I'm not saying that organizations shouldn't support people's career growth. I hope they do. But I also want employees to have enough ownership that they're like, at least from a 60-40. I believe 60% of the ownership is on the employee, because if you're not owning more than half, then you don't have enough skin in the game. And no matter what the organization throws out at you, development-wise, exposure, experience, education, you're not going to grab it. You're not going to grab it. You're not going to do enough with it. It's similar to like when I partied my way out of college after a year. I just didn't take it seriously.
Right.
Until my parents said like, all right, you're on your own now. And then I was able to go like, oh, okay, this is serious now. Yes, this is serious. You made a commitment to an organization, whether it's 4 people or 40,000 people. This is serious business. Right. You committed to them. And if you're going to put a lot into it, they will give it back to you. I've seen it happen. So it makes me get excited, right? That we can have this bridge of life and work. Yeah.
And I think that leaders, like I know I used to, when I was younger and see the leaders, I thought, oh, they've got it all together. Everything's, hunky-dory for them. And that's definitely not the case. And they've got a lot on their plate too. So if you as an employee or somebody that in that organization come to them with a plan, like let's say they have to approve the budget, but you say, this is what I want to do. I've looked into these courses. I'd like to have a coach help me in this area. I mean, be proactive. If you're helping yourself, they're going to be more likely to help you.
Yes. And I tell people, we're not talking about going back and getting your master's or your doctorate or some certificate. I'm literally talking about 3 basic things, right? You've got to get better at being curious, because people like to be asked questions. People like to have input. And when you bring more people along with your questions and your curiosity, you're going to have more people, hopefully at least understanding your side, if not on it, right? So it's one way to overcome adversity and make an impact at work. The second way is to get better at storytelling, right? Because you can be as curious as you want, but if you aren't able to tell your stories and your ideas and what I would say is a meaningful yet non-confrontational way, because I think a lot of people get very I guess maybe intimidated by some of the ideas that are coming from big idea people. So I don't want you to play small. I want you to learn how to tell your stories really, really well. So curiosity, we ask questions, storytelling, we're able to tell in a non-intimidating way. And then the third is very referenced to what you were saying, which is I want people to know how to put together a plan. Even if it's here's the problem, here's my potential solution, here's what I know about what it's going to cost or time-wise or whatever, and here's what I don't know. We are so many people. This is what got me into this work is like, I spent so many years in these corporate environments, getting to know people really well. Then we'd get in the room and there would be crickets. Nobody. And I was thinking like, you have a great idea. I know you do. Or I know you don't believe in this. So you should actually speak up, say why you don't believe in it so we can all talk about it because I'm not feeling the way you are, but maybe somebody else is. And I just want that collective push to stop. It's almost like that movie WALL-E. Did you ever see WALL-E by Disney? Where all the people move to like, what do they move to the moon? And what they do is they end up getting on conveyor belts and just literally never walking. Just, it feels like me over the last year. Like I don't move enough. I just sit around. I'm just drinking out of a large slurping cup or whatever. They've given up ownership of their mobility, of their ability to be human. And I think that's really what we've done in the workplace too, is just sort of gotten on this conveyor belt, expecting that people will hand us this golden career when just like a life, nobody gives it to you. You have to work for it.
Nobody cares as much about your career and you as you do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to imagine all those meetings all across the world where people are sitting there with some really good ideas, but they don't get spoken, and how that doesn't optimize what we could do, what we could accomplish.
Agreed.
How does somebody get the confidence to speak up?
I mean, I think speaking up there's a skill set at it, right? But that's why we do that. That's why we practice asking questions. That's why we practice telling stories, is because even with my own career, although I believe it was very successful internally for 20 years in corporate America and now almost 5 on my own, there was times where I was sucking it up. Like I just didn't have the finesse, the skill set needed, but you have to try to get better at it. So for me, it's about developing more habits because you think about cultural. Everybody talks about like culture. What's the culture at your workplace, right? What they're really asking is like, what's the vibe? Yeah. But the thing is that people want to point to, this is our mission or a vision of our organization, or these are our values. But here, that is not your culture. Those are the things, those are like North Stars that you're pointing at. And I want you to have those. Yeah. Very aspirational. The culture is actually the outcome of your daily habits and behaviors. So if your mission and your vision and your values matter if everybody's living them out every day and you can point to them. But if they're not, then your culture is something entirely different. And you have to change a culture by forming good habits, forming habits that align with the direction you want to go in, which is the same way we overcome adversity for ourselves. As we say, I didn't like how that felt. I didn't like how that went. My question to myself and other people, like every one-on-one I have with my team member, for example, it ends with, what can I do better or differently for you? And that's the only question I can ever ask of myself when something doesn't go as I want it to be. Let's take the last year, for example. Like, what could I do better or differently? And honestly, sometimes the answer is nothing.
Right.
I was scrappy and I did what I could to be a good mama during the past 8 months of homeschooling children while trying to run a company, while caring for my husband and caring for friends and family and trying to keep our distance. It's been a complicated time. And sometimes the answer to the question could be not much, or I could have done things differently, but it would have cost more over here. So it's just that like cost benefit analysis of like, I didn't do too bad and I'm never going to be in the exact situation ever again, ideally. But if it did, here's how I might approach it differently, right? I just think individually and collectively, that's all we can ever do, better or different.
So you left a corporate job when your kids were, I'm just, based on what you said, I'm thinking when they were about 5 to start their business.
They just turned 5. Yeah.
What were you thinking?
That's what everybody says. You know what? It was after I was being groomed to be the chief human capital officer at the organization that I was at. And it was a very big honor. And I had put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that organization too. But for the 2 years leading up to the time that I resigned, it was like a period of self-torture where as much as I've been through like these huge, big rock adversities, I'm thinking I have this great job and they're asking me to do this great role where I would have great, like challenging work and really good pay. And here I am feeling like I don't want it. It sort of felt like I should get over it and just take it. But I kept having this, like I'm a Libra, so I go back and forth. And I kept having this conversation with myself of like, but I don't think I want it. But I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So I explored, should I go run a nonprofit? Should I do this? Maybe I'll do a similar role at a different company. Maybe I'll do a different role in the same company that I'm in right now. Like you name it, I put myself through it. And finally I decided like, I think I'm going to go out on my own. I think at the time, I needed a break, honestly. That savior complex of that boy I dated in high school comes up again when I'm in an organization and I'm like, oh, I want to save it all. And at the time I needed that distance to say, it's not my job to save you. It's my job to take good care of me and to use my skills and my strengths in the best way that I can. And that meant not working in an organization, but leaving and working on numerous organizations, which for me at the time was a really nice, healthy distance, right? I needed new habits. I had gotten out of the healthy habits that I had before. And now I'm really at a place where I'm loving my company and I have big plans for it. And I would also be very open for, a head of people job at a startup or something that I felt passionate about what they were doing, because I do like to work in a collective. And that is one piece, even though I have a team, I'm always in charge, And so it's like, it would be nice to be part of a collective unit who was working towards a big goal, right? A bigger team than four.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I get it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes my guests will suggest some questions, and you have this really good question you suggested, like, how can we shift the rhythm of our life or work to feel more in alignment?
Yeah, that goes to the habits we were talking about. So I have four quick things that I'll tell people. If you want to form new habits, you have to shake up the rhythm. You can look at whatever science you want to about habits. If you've read Atomic Habits, if you've read High Performing Habits, there's so many books out of there. And they all stem from one researcher, and I'm forgetting her name. So I'll send you the link so you can include it. I feel like her book, I can see it. It was like Good Habits, something. I'm going to look it up and give it to you. Anyway, this all stems from that. So when I think about, if you want to get different results, you have to do something different, right? You can't do the same thing and expect different results. So first thing I say is you have to get data. If you want to change something, but you don't know what or how, you need to do data. Like you need data. So you have to do a time analysis of your time. So at least a week, probably 2. I think any more than 2, you're going to get annoyed with it and you're going to lose your passion for this. Yeah. But you got to understand, how are you using your time? And once you are able to step back and look at that data, then you say, again, my key question is, what could I do better or differently with this time? Limited time that I have, limited priorities that I have, how could I do this better or differently? So get the data so you're making data-driven decisions for your life. Number 2 is know your strengths, right? What are those habits? What am I really good at? What am I not so hot at? Who do I need to delegate to or supplement with? I'm a big believer in Clifton Strengths, right? It used to be Strengths Finder by Gallup. Again, that data of an assessment, whether it's Clifton Strengths or Myers-Briggs or Insights, or all that data helps you understand your self-awareness and execute better. So do that. Third thing I would say, I talk about this in my TEDx talk, but I tell it all the time, which is you need to be sewing your passion patchwork. Too many people limit themselves and say that I should only be passionate about one thing. I believe that we can be multi-passionate. I believe that we should give ourselves permission to change our mind and to try new things in micro and macro ways. And so the concept of the passion patchwork is that you could have a bedspread and it could be a solid color, or you could have a really magical quilt, right? Like the quilt on my bed from my grandmother, who I never met, my grandmother Zula, but I have this quilt that she made, and it's tattered and it's got all these colors and textures on it. And that's the kind of life that I want, of these different squares. And when one square on my passion patchwork no longer serves me, I can swap it out with something else. Right. I can put a new color, a new texture on there. It's my quilt. And that goes back to that permission.
What if somebody's that also requires leaving your comfort zone, right?
I know. And here's the balance. Here's the counterbalance. Because my 4th tip really, Emily, is about keeping it simple. As much as I want you to be multi-passionate, I also want you to try to not focus on too many things at one time.
Right.
So you've got to give yourself a break, that you could be interested in all these things, but what is my biggest priority right now? So I'm a big believer in that concept of the one thing, right? That one task at a time, right? I usually try to work in 90-minute increments. Personally, that's been found to be very successful. One thing at a time, one big priority at a time, one topic at a time. Too often we're multitasking, right? I'm on this call, but I'm looking down at my phone. No, the only thing I have in front of me are my brief notes that I have. You really have to no alerts on your phone. 2 months ago, I took off all the apps on my phone, my email, my LinkedIn, my social media, all of them off my phone. Too much of a distraction. I was getting on there for no reason. So again, if I want to have a different result, I have to change the behavior.
Well, yeah, especially this time lately with COVID and the election, I just have shut off my alerts on my phone. I haven't taken my email and stuff off, but it seemed like every hour, every 10 minutes, there was some alert with bad news, or stressful news. And
so you got to set up good boundaries for yourself. And my goal about boundaries is always this, guys, like boundaries are good, but I think sometimes people get carried away and they end up bringing like concrete walls. Mm-hmm. So boundaries should look to me and like a flowered path, right? Like a path through the woods that you have lined with flowers that gives clear delineation where you're walking, but it doesn't have to be lined with barbed wire. Yeah. We get too extreme sometimes of putting up too many boundaries that we miss the opportunity. So I would rather see us be a little bit more, what is like Brene says, strong back, soft front, wild heart. Like strong back would be a boundary, a sidewalk lined with concrete or barbed wire, right? But strong back, soft front, especially wild heart, means like you got to align your boundaries so that people actually enjoy your boundaries and that you actually benefit from them too.
So how do you think most people can figure this all out on themselves without the help of a coach or like a counselor? Or how important to have a coach or counselor in your life?
If you can figure it out on your own, kudos to you. But I said this earlier, like I would not be where I am without coaches and therapists. And people think that's a sales pitch. I'm going to say that till my dying day, regardless if I'm a coach. I believe that we get too inside of ourselves. Like there was a time where my therapist, like I've had therapists after working together for long periods of time, like get over yourself. One therapist said, like, you are going to really screw up your kids. So we should really talk about, stop talking about like, are you, and just acknowledge that you are. And we should talk about how, like these are the people that are going to speak the truth into your life. That's from a therapist perspective, from a coach perspective, having a coach say like, it doesn't feel like the pattern of behavior that you've been using for that problem is working for you. What are you going to do differently? Mm-hmm. And not to give you the answers, but you're a smart, talented person. Everybody that I talk to is. We can get there, but sometimes you need somebody to just help you. Sometimes it's confidence. Sometimes it's capacity, right? I don't even have the capacity to think. So setting aside an hour with a coach creates capacity for an issue that you've never talked about before.
See your blind spots. Mm-hmm. Push you in areas that you probably wouldn't push yourself, or just things that you don't think you have an issue with, but maybe you do. I mean, I worked for the federal government my whole career. We had mentors. We were encouraged to get mentors, but that's not the same as a coach, I don't think. And the mentors aren't really trained in coaching. And then when I became a senior executive, I did get an executive coach, and that was very helpful, but that was really late in my career. So then when I retired and became a coach myself and also invested in some coaches, I had some issues with investing in coaches because I had never had to invest in something like that myself. My employer always did it or whatever, but I can tell you the investment has been definitely worth it.
Yeah. And there'll be people, look, my biggest payers are corporations who pay to have me coach their people. But my private pay people, I've had individuals say like, well, that's more expensive than my therapist, and I can get insurance to cover my therapist. Well, I want you to go to therapy, so you should definitely do that. Mm-hmm. But if you want to talk about this one thing that's specifically bothering you or related to your business or your leadership, then I'm the person to help you with that when you're ready. But they have to be ready to make the financial investment. And I do believe that a lot of it has to do with the person knows that they aren't ready to change yet. And so then I think like, I'll see you when you're ready.
Yeah.
I'll be here when you're ready.
Invest in that. But I mean, I could see too, as an employee of a company, if your company invests in everything like that for you, then you're not invested. Then you're probably not as invested in getting the best outcome either.
Right. Again, 2/3 of our workforce is not engaged. And I'm not saying it's all the workplace's fault, because we have high depression rates, high suicide rates, high unemployment rates. We have all these things, a national pandemic, all these things that are affecting the way that we show up. And we bring that micro and macro trauma with us. The micro and macro trauma sometimes happens to us in the workplace. We just have to sort of acknowledge. And when we ignore the reality and we try to be too Pollyanna about it, we actually are harming really everyone, including ourselves. We're not helping anyone out with that facade.
Well, a lot of the people that I've used to work that I used to work with before I retired, working in the government, they're like, some of them don't even really know how to find a coach. How would you recommend someone find a coach, and what are the things that we should look for in coaches?
Well, I know people use social media a lot to look for coaches. I think that's a great place. My team does our social media account. So you get a little taste of me out there. LinkedIn, you can look at talks. Like if you were looking at a coach, I would see what you could find online, right? It's a great place to start. What's on their website, kind of talks that they give in, watching and listening to interviews like this, you're going to get to really know their style, right? Because we have our guard down. None of this is planned, right? We're just sort of having this conversation. So I think get your good sense of that. And I always tell people when they reach out to me, if they're individual and they reach out to me, I'm like, who else are you talking to? Mm-hmm. What other coaches are you interviewing? So I would really like you to interview at least 3, because I kind of think about this as like a dating app, right? Where, we're not going to get married, but it's almost like you're claiming that you're going to only date me for a little while. It's a big commitment. And I want to make sure that like, I'm pretty likable first round, but like, I really want to make sure that I'm the right thing for you. And so you should really push your coach to talk through like, what would be their approach to deal with the problem or the opportunity, however you're going to phrase that for your coaching needs, and just really get to know them, interview a lot of people. And if it's not working, don't be afraid to change. Like really don't be afraid to change.
And then one of my coaches said, it's always a good idea to invest in a coach that's investing in a coach for themselves too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Coaches are growers, they're learners, they're contributors, they're teachers. And if you grab a coach, and there are times, right? Like I haven't been doing as much self-development over the past 8 months because, I can't. But I can still tell you the books I'm reading. I can still tell you the things that I'm working on for myself. You need to have a coach who is how I always phrase it is doing the work, right? I can tell when my clients show up and they didn't do the work. I'm like, I get life happens and you didn't do the work this week, but like you got to continually try to do the work. We have a bad day. We might have a bad week. We may even have a bad season of something like really tragic that's happening in our life. But overall, I want to know you're doing the work, and you should definitely want a coach who's doing the work.
Yeah.
The work.
And a coach can keep you pushing you to do the work too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like accountability partner is a big part of that. Just literally having someone know that you said you were going to do it.
Yeah. So what's next for you and your company?
Yeah. Well, right now we've always been a 100% virtual company, but I worked pretty much in person with my clients, but with quarantine and COVID-19, I was in India in January doing a founders retreat for Indian female founders from India. It was great trip. But really, since then, I've been in-house doing virtual workshops and keynotes, a lot of owning your career, a lot of team performance, a lot of leadership. Got some interesting things coming up for 2021, but just a lot more of that speaking. And then the coaching and consulting is in there too, but that is so much more specific to someone's needs, and the timing, is it right that we would be able to partner together? And so there's obviously a little bit more planning and selectivity that happens with that type of process.
So what are your main tips for somebody who's facing some tough times in their lives? Do you have any tips for overcoming adversity?
Yeah. I really go back to those 4 tips I gave before. You've got to get data, because I've been there, guys, and I've even been there over the past 8 months where you get real cloudy. It's just really hard to like think clearly about what's going on. So that data of doing your time analysis is really going to give you information. And yes, there might be some triggers in there about like some shame or disappointment, but data helps us make different decisions going forward. Mm-hmm. And it's good to see and track your own progress, right? Did you spend 10% less time on the internet this week, this day, right? Use apps, use a piece of paper. I don't care. But getting that data is really important. Knowing who your strengths are, do an assessment, guys. Get that like data. I'm data, right? Like, because we get too shifted in our own way of thinking that we can miss things. We can really miss opportunities, and we can miss things to be concerned about too. So
thing like get to know yourself better too, right?
Yeah, that self-awareness is so big. If that can work for our top CEOs, guys, don't you want to be a top CEO of your life? Like manage your life? That's so I sort of look at it the same way.
So what do you mean it works for top CEOs? They get coaches in that area, right?
That self-awareness is the number one predictor of success for CEOs. So if it works for them, it works for us too.
Right.
We just got to give it a chance.
Yeah. So any last minute tips as we wrap this up?
No, I think people need to absorb in the right amounts. Some people are high learner strength and they need to nurture that, but we do need to sort of cap our learning sometimes and just get quiet in our own voice. Because I think if we're inputting, like after this episode, do you need to listen to 5 more podcasts, or could you ponder what this podcast might have given you in the way of thinking, or maybe even things that we just planted a seed on but didn't even talk about could come up in your spirit. So I think seek information, but have good boundaries around that too, so that you're actually working to apply it.
That's a really good point, because I was on a coach's call with my coach. It was a group coaching program, and she had one of her coaches on. But the bottom line is, we're talking about, you can read, and women, I think, tend to do this a lot, maybe more than men. You're reading all these self-help books, you're reading all these different books, read. But she said, I advise you to just go 3 months without reading any more books.
Oof, yeah.
And just spend time with yourself, like meditating, quieting your mind. Take that time that you would be reading and just trying to find the answer in the book. The answer is within you already. But you just have to slow down and quiet your mind to hear it.
Yeah, that's funny. I told you about that 2-year self-inflicted torture period before I resigned. And by the way, I gave 9 months of leadway and they were fine, and they knew all about my resignation. So anyway, but I look back on that time where I finally decided, and in that 2 years, I had talked to so many people. I had read all the books. Yeah. I had tried to listen to my own coaching. And when I finally discovered what I wanted was when I went away to a cabin with a notebook and a pen and a bottle of wine and got real quiet, had no cell phone reception. And all of a sudden it was like that. Like, this is where I can't explain why I'm going to do this, but I think this is my next step. Like, clarity does come when we get quiet. There is power in that pause for sure.
Just quiet, all that chatter, all that distraction, all that noise.
It is noise. It is. Yeah. So get quiet and trust yourself. Not every idea that you have is going to turn out. Not every effort you put into it is going to have 100% return on that effort in that area. Oh, I did this one thing and now everything's fine over here. No, like, it's a puzzle. But if you make that effort, if you do that work, you have nothing that you left behind. Like, you're putting it all in.
So how do people find you if they want to know more about what you offer?
Yeah. So we're just updating our social media. So I'll give you the new one. On Instagram, it's at The Oaks Co. And Oaks is OAKES. So it's The Oaks Co. You can also see my personal one, which is not updated very much, but that's the Anna Oaks. Our website will be theoaksco.com also. So we invite you to check that out. We'll link that in the show notes too, I hope. Yep. So we'll make sure you have all those links. But yeah, LinkedIn is a great place too. It's a great expanding sort of social platform where I think it's blending really well right now, are the users, right? Because it's really up to the users, but the users are blending the life and the work really well right now, especially during quarantine. So kind of nice to see humanity show up really well there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anna, for being my guest on the Onward podcast.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. It was my honor. Looking forward to keeping in touch with you, Emily.
Yes. I really enjoyed that interview, and I hope that you did too. I love talking to other coaches to hear how they're influencing and changing lives. As I said in the interview, I had never really worked with a coach my whole career until my very last job. And that was when I learned the value of a coach. And since I've retired, since May of 2019, I have worked with tons of different coaches, as well as a counselor in different areas of my life, working on improving my self-awareness, improving the knowledge of myself. And it's led to so many neat revelations and working through some pain as well. In the show notes, you'll find links for how to reach Anna. And I also put a link at the very end for how to schedule a 15-minute complimentary coaching call with me. I currently have slots open in my group coaching program. I call it the Onward Accelerator Program. And I also do one-on-one coaching. So if you're interested, please schedule that meeting with me. Have a great week.